Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is a beautiful day. It's a very beautiful day. I was thinking about the thoughts that have been presented this morning. And as usual, my mind just takes rabbit holes, and I think about things that I should say because of what has been said. One of the thoughts that Ron presented is really dear to me. That's this idea of swearing to one's own hurt. That's a concept that is pretty rare in today's world. People who are willing to tell the truth, to give an oath, and to live by that oath no matter what it costs you. And I'm thinking of we're going back to Abraham's time with my lesson here this morning. But I want to go back to chapter 15 of Genesis and the promise that God swore to Abraham. That's repeated in Hebrews. It tells us that God swore with an oath by himself because there was no greater that he could swear by. And the oath was this, that God was going to, through Abraham's seed, bless all nations of the earth. That was an oath that was going to be sealed by a peculiar kind of ritual. And that is that the Lord commanded that animals be taken, and the animals were cut in two, cut in half, right down the middle, and the halves were laid apart. And then the ritual was that all kings of the earth, and we have records of Hittite kings who were dominant in those days, making this kind of an oath with other kings in the area in the Levant. And in those swearings, this ritual took place where the two kings that made the promise of loyalty to one another would pass between the pieces of these animals. The kings would march between those pieces carrying torches. And there is historical record of this taking place before Abraham's time. So God takes an example that is known to men of that day, and he makes this covenant with Abraham. And the covenant is that God is swearing that he's going to bless all nations through the seed of Abraham, and that he's going to give Abraham's descendants this land. But there's a difference between that oath and the one that was taken by other kings. And that is that in the cases of other kings, they both passed between the pieces. They both passed between these dead animals, and the reason for that was whoever violates this oath was going to be like those animals. That was the point behind the sacrifice. But only God passed between the pieces. Only God's representative made this oath that this was going to happen. It did not depend on Abraham. It didn't depend on any of Abraham's descendants. It was a promise made by God, dependent only on God. He swore to his own hurt. In the example that we have in Genesis 22 of God telling Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son. I want you to take him to a place called Moriah. And there I want you to sacrifice this son. And he had named the son that would be this. He had named him Isaac. Take your son Isaac, and I want you to offer him in sacrifice to me on the mountain. On this mountain that is called Moriah. You know, folks, I don't think there was a place called Moriah at the time. I think the place called Moriah became known as that place because God sent Abraham there, and he says, I will show you the place. So he took Isaac and he wandered and he found the place. Now that sacrifice back there in Genesis 15, that was interesting because that was God saying, I'm going to pay the price. In Genesis 22, the place called Moriah means the place where God will provide himself a sacrifice. Think about that for a moment. That can be taken two ways. Either God himself will provide a place or a sacrifice. Or it can mean just as easily, God will provide himself a sacrifice. In other words, God be the sacrifice. He swore to his own hurt. Because the very person of deity who made Abraham take that oath is the one who left heaven, came to this earth, and paid that price for us. He swore to his own hurt to deliver us, to bless all men of every nation. It's hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine for a number of reasons. Number one, the things that person had to give up in order to come and do that for me. You know, we were talking this morning in class about there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's hard to find friends who will stay with you no matter what happens, no matter how painful it gets. Friends say, like Peter, do you remember Peter saying, oh, the rest of them might do that, but I won't, Lord. I'm with you to the end. I'd die for you, Lord. And the Lord said, before the cock crows 3 times, you'll deny me 3 times. Not me, Lord, not me. But he did. There is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. He made the promise, and he lived up to the promise, even to his own hurt. I want to talk about beautiful and courageous. Kind of fits with the same idea. You know, last week we talked about beautiful and intelligent. And that was the story of Abigail, the wife of King David, after a lot of hardship on her part, after she proved herself to be a very heroic and courageous woman. This morning I want to talk about another one. I want to talk about Sarai. Sarai. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Ur the Chaldees, when he actually left Haran. And he started for the land of Canaan. Canaan. That was a rough and tumble neighborhood there, kind of like it still is. We have the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that is still going and will go on until the end of time, I'm sure. But it was no different then. Well, it wasn't quite as bad then, but we have Abraham who moves into the area. But man, there's a famine. It is terrible. This famine is terrible. Abraham's got to go somewhere. Abram, not yet named Abraham, still named Abram, has to go somewhere because there's nothing to eat. He took his wife and his nephew, Lot, and everything that he owned. I don't know how much he had at this time, but he was obviously fairly wealthy at this time. He said, let's go, gang, let's go find us a place. And that place had nothing. They had to go somewhere else. So they chose to go to Egypt. Egypt always had grain. Always had grain because the Nile River, it didn't matter if there was a famine in the land, the Nile River flooded every year. You could always get food in Egypt, it seemed like, anyway, up until now. So Abraham took his beautiful wife. Oh, we didn't talk about how he got his wife. Abraham got his wife kind of close to home. His brother Nahor, who had died, had this daughter. Her name was Sarai. You know, somebody said, "Ooh, that's incest." No, it wasn't. Not at this time. Because incest can only be incest if it's wrong, if it's not allowed by God. And at this time, it was allowed by God. You know, there was a reason why the Lord chose the time of Moses to give the law that you don't marry any closer than cousin. It has to be like, I think it was third cousin that you could marry, but no closer than that. And the reason was the genetic load had been developing during all the time from Adam up until now. And up until now, there was no physical danger in marrying your sister. Seems a little weird to us, for sure, but there was nothing wrong with it. And besides, she was his half-sister, and God approved of it. So he takes this beautiful young woman, and by the time they get to Canaan, Abraham is 75 and she's 65. But she's still a very beautiful woman. But Abraham does something here that just absolutely shocks the pants off of me. I just can't understand it. And I know for certain that no woman I've ever known would agree to this. He says, "Now, listen here, hon. You are so beautiful, and we're going into a strange land, and I want you to understand now that if they know that I'm your husband, they're going to kill me and take you. And you'll be safe. So since you," and he didn't say this, but this is kind of understood, "since you are my half-sister, tell them you're my sister. And then it'll all go well for both of us." Now, I'm not sure how he figured that was going to be good for her. But he said, "Please do this for me." I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm still trying to understand this. She agrees to do it. So they go to Egypt, and it's exactly like Abram thought. They took this woman because she was beautiful. There's something here that I want you to think about. God always has reasons for things happening. Abraham needed to be a very wealthy man. It was part of God's plan that Abraham be a very wealthy man. I don't know if this is why the Lord allowed this, but when she got hooked up with Pharaoh, Abram became a very wealthy man because Pharaoh gave him animals and stuff and gold and everything you can think of was given to Abram because of this woman. How would you, if you were the woman, feel being given away to somebody to keep somebody else safe? We think of women as being the weaker sex. But here, this woman, she's the one that's saving everybody here. She goes into the palace of Pharaoh by herself. She faces who knows what for her husband and her nephew and whoever else is in. Do you think there's any one of the men in that family that would have admitted that this woman was going to save their hides? That wasn't the way men thought, but that's exactly what Abraham's saying. Go save me, woman. And she goes into Pharaoh's house while her cowardly husband takes advantage of that. I don't like calling Abraham a coward, but he was. This is the same man that takes 318 men and goes out and fights 5 kings and wins with 318 men. How does a brave man turn into a coward one day and be the brave man the next? I think there's a lesson in there for us. The lesson is that the brave man and the coward is in every one of us. And it's the decisions that we make every day that determines what we're going to be that day. But I am so impressed with this woman who did what she did to save her family. Pharaoh, it didn't take Pharaoh long to find out that this was a bad mistake. It says, pestilence came upon the land. There was something bad that happened everywhere. And the wombs were, I don't know how long this took. It says the wombs were shut up. Nothing was bearing because of this. So Pharaoh comes to Abraham and says, what in the world have you done to me? Why did you tell me she was your sister? And Abraham admits, because you'd have killed me. And he probably would have. I think we have such a misconception of what a hero can be. A hero is courageous. It has nothing to do with gender. A hero is courageous. It has nothing to do with size. A hero is courageous. It has nothing to do with anything but the spirit of the person within. There are so many cases of the slight, of the blind, of the female, of the male, of the unlikely being the heroes in God's book. We need to understand that a hero can take any form, any shape, any size, and can be what God wants them to be. We tend to be so prejudiced in our views of what we will accept as a person of God. We had a visitor this morning. I don't know him, and he wasn't here long. But I can tell you something about me. I was ashamed of my reaction when he came into the building. My first reaction was, what does he want? My first reaction was not, how can I persuade this person? My first reaction was this: I don't want to be like that. I don't want to look at somebody and judge them because of their size, because of their beauty, because of their intelligence. I don't want to judge someone at all. I want to do what God put me here to do and to let Him be the judge.
Amen.
Please help me to do that. Please help me to shape and to mold myself into a man of God who will accept anyone, regardless of race or creed. Well, not creed. We're going to have to draw a line there, because that's what you believe. That has to do with what you believe, what you hold dear. But as far as size or gender or outward abilities, looks, I want nothing to do with that. If you know that your life is not right before God today, would you realize with me that every last one of us, regardless of what we look like or what kind of health we're in, can be a tool for God in His kingdom. There is a place for us. There is a place for every last human being to be useful to God, to be an instrument in the hand of God to save the soul of someone in this world. Won't you join me? Won't you be a part of that? Won't you come this morning while we stand and sing the song that's been announced? Join the heroes like Sarah. Won't you come?
I'm satisfied with just the cottage below.